Hello, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed the Out There Halloween mega tape. I have the immense pleasure now of sitting down with the filmmaker. You may know him from his past films, the WNUF Halloween Special or Call Girl of Cthulhu, or from his monstrous surf rock band, Beach Creeper. Give it up for Chris LaMartina.
How's it going, guys? Good to hear
How
you.
are you?
I'm doing very, very well. How about you?
Doing well. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, before we get into Out There Halloween Mega Tape, I feel like we have to start with WNUF. So, what was
Okay.
the impetus behind making that film to begin with?
So the impetus before WNF Halloween special was the idea that we wanted to make a found footage movie, and we were like, because it'd been a couple summers since we'd made one, and one of the things we had thought about doing was like, what don't we like about found footage movies, right? And one of the things we never like, we sort of wrote a laundry list of all the things we hated about found footage films. One was the fact that when you get a movie with a UPC code on it, you kind of know it's not really like found footage. The other thing too was how often are people really, why are they filming? There's so many weird circumstances where like when you're watching a found footage film, you're like someone turn the camera off at that point. And then the third thing was so many of those movies are very much like based around like one location, minimal actors, very, very kind of boring type stuff, right? Like, and I always made ensemble films. So with the original WF, we sort of looked at those three questions and reverse engineered from them. So, okay, so we'll start forwards to backwards. So, or backwards to forwards. So the first thing was, okay, how could I break up the monotony of one location and then I started thinking of this idea of actually putting commercial breaks. Like what if the found footage and these all started to gel together. Like
When you
if
have
I
a background in advertising, right?
I do, yeah. So I was for a long time I was a creative director at a couple different ad agencies in Baltimore. And now I do internal communications for a big company. But yeah, I mean like my background was in advertising. So like I got to essentially write all these commercials for businesses that like no one would ever let me do a commercial like these for them, right? But in my head, I'd have sort of this laundry list of like all these really shitty puns that no one client would ever let me use, or really dumb, things like exploding soda cans and things like that. But the idea of breaking the monotony was important, and then subsequently the idea of like making it a TV show where like of course they have to keep going no matter how fucked up things get because it's advertising revenue, right?
Mhm.
And then the third thing was when we first released it, there was no UPC code on it because we released it on VHS. We literally did a whisper campaign where we threw VHS out the window. We left them at horror conventions and thrift stores, and then ultimately we put it on DVD a couple of months after that, or 6 months after that, depending when you got it. But yeah, it was that was all part of the shtick to build that sort of mythology around the movie.
That's awesome. And so the original film came out in 2013, and I don't think it's a stretch to say it kind of became an instant Halloween success. I know a lot of people immediately added it to their list of I have to watch this every year for Halloween movies. When did the decision to make a sequel come about?
So I think as soon as I was finished the original film, like the first month after making it, and I made that movie while we were in pre-production on Call Girl of Cthulhu. Like it literally was supposed to be like this. Oh, no one's fucking stupid enough to like this movie, right? Like we're just gonna make this thing because we really want to do this weird fucking essentially an art project. And we finished it, and as we were working on Call Girl, we were in production on Call Girl. I kept thinking about it again, and I was like, man, like I loved making these fake commercials, and like really telling a story through fake archival content seemed like a lot of fun. Like a lot of films like use archival things and moments, but I really thought like the idea of building a world through what media exists in that world, whether it was advertising or television show, would be this really unique experience. And I don't think that many people had done it that I could remember at the time that I was even cross-referencing in what we were doing. And so back then I was like, I want to like, could this exist? Could this keep going? Could there be a sequel, not necessarily a linear sequel, although there are some threads, but more of like a spiritual sequel? And does the same nostalgia for the 1980s translate into the 1990s? And I mean, very quickly I realized yes, especially in the last, because I started thinking about the sequel not long after we finished the original in 2013. So
Yeah.
like literally in 2014, 2015, I started thinking like my wheels started turning like what would the 90s sequel be and what culturally would have changed to like what story would I tell with through a 90s lens. So I started making the fake commercials first, probably starting around 2015. That's when I started making them. but very, very like one or two every maybe couple months because I'd be bored and I'd be like, oh, let's make a fucking a footwear commercial. Like I would just like have these sort of these afternoons where I'd be like, I want to do something. So
Oh, wow. So how long were you in production with this overall then, from when you filmed the first commercial to the completion?
So it was, I would say 4 to 5 years. So
Oh,
like
wow.
the commercials started, it's the longest, well, the film we made right before that, What Happens Next Will Scare You, might be a little longer. Production wise, that was like 6 years, but that was because of some craziness. But this one was more like, it was leisurely at first, right? Mostly because I wanted to take my time with it. The original WNUF from script to screen was 9 months. And I think it was so fast, like that was the fastest I've ever, script to screen of any film I've ever made, that I was sort of like, man, that was the most fun I've ever had making a movie. Why don't I take my time and sort of invest more hours into like, oh, fake logos or more production in these moments? So ultimately, it was about 4 to 5 years. We raised the money to make most of it in 2018 to 2019.
Well, I think that extra effort shows. I mean, I was a big fan of WNUF. You know that because I messaged you about this before I even ever saw the sequel. But having watched it a few times now, I really, really enjoy this one. So you started with the commercials. When did the storyline with Tate and Ivy come about? And did you have any kind of major TV influences that took you in that direction?
Absolutely. So the big thing with influences was obviously like, okay, a couple things here. So one of the things was I knew I wanted to be about aliens. And part of the reasons why I wanted to be about aliens was like I thought that was a very uniquely 90s
So
obsession. Like, I mean, it exists in the last, 50 years of alien stuff, or probably since Roswell, there's been alien stuff, but it really felt iconically 90s, right? Like you have X-Files, you have Independence Day, you've got Sightings, and obviously Sightings is a massive influence on what we did with Out There. I mean, literally, it was really funny. Sometimes when you make these movies and you're sort of trying to come up with like fake rip-off names or like homage names, you have these sort of moments where I did not know there was a show called Encounters, and I guess clearly I'm an idiot that didn't know about Encounters. But I was like, oh, maybe we'll call it Encounters because that sounds like Sightings. And there's already a show, and I was like, and I ended up watching a couple episodes. I was like, wow, this is like really pretty similar to Sightings. But it's funny. Obviously the character of Ivy Sparks was influenced very much by the story that you probably just saw is very influenced by something like Jenny Jones, like sort of like fucked up exploitative tragedy. But then I think Ivy Sparks as a character is way more informed by Ricky Lake,
yeah.
right? As I looked at the talk shows that I watched growing up, I'm Ricky Lake, very much a Baltimore connection there. But ultimately, there was a niceness and a kindness to Ricky Lake that didn't exist in a lot of other talk shows. Like some talk shows were truly exploitative and like treated their guests like just monsters, whereas I think Ricky Lake always had a bit more humanity to her. So I thought that was important for making an empathetic character with Ivy. But I think the early influences were Sightings and Ricky Lake, and but also doing something. Could I make a movie that could jump time and also years? And that's where the Trader Tony element came in. Like, well, how would those be combined without necessarily fast forwarding or some sort of like title screen? And I know, and I used to buy tapes from like bootleg tape operations when I was a kid. I mean, literally, it was just so funny. Like, I would get find these catalogs in the back of Fangoria, which I had a subscription to as a kid, and my mom would be like, oh, and she's like, let me just look at it before you read this magazine, and she'd be like, oh yeah, just don't look at the front. There's just like dirty stuff in the front you shouldn't see. And then she'd just hand me the whole magazine still. So as soon as a kid, I'd be like, what the fuck is the dirty stuff up front? And then I go to the back and see all these ads for VHS tapes I could buy from these catalogs. So the idea of doing something like a mega tape where it's like a half hour for Halloween show and then the rest of the special like made sense in the context of this universe.
This film is so rich. You talked a bit earlier about, weaving in the commercials, but it really does expand such a massive world building. But the Trader Tony stuff, I think that the audience watching this maybe didn't pick up a lot of that because a lot of that is on the release of it, right? So anybody in the audience, come see me afterwards, and I want to show you the DVD case and the inserts and everything in it. And you also have Henry Zabrowski from last podcast doing commentary as Trader Tony, right?
That's correct. Yes. So I'm also just realizing how much carving this pumpkin is jostling the laptop. I'm like there's someone in probably the front row who has motion sickness just vomiting in their popcorn right now. And this is one of the reasons why I've been really reluctant to not have it be part of like streaming platforms right now. Because I like the idea of somebody getting a DVD and learning about this world this way. So I knew early on that we were going to have Trader Tony's Tape Dungeon be part of the mythology of the film. So you're getting a VHS tape from Trader Tony's Tape Dungeon. And during the lockdown initially, the first month or so of the pandemic, where nobody was really going anywhere, or however long it was, I sat down, and Melissa, my wife, who's also Ivy Sparks in the film, we would, like, we'd crack open a bottle of wine, we'd come up with some fake movie titles, and then basically for 2 months or so, every day I wrote about 10 to 20 blurbs of fake movies that you could buy from Trader Tony's Tape Dungeon. So you'd literally get so like when you go to our big cartel site, you can literally get the VHS, the DVD, and a catalog of Trader Tony's titles. And it's literally 350 fake exploitation, like horror, sci-fi, triple X, weird, just like fetish videos, like all kinds of weird things you can get. Lots of like from Japanese Laserdisc, like the alternate ending, uncut, like, and but that's the thing too, making that part of the mythology of the world. I wanted to do an in-world commentary with Trader Tony, and Henry Zabrowski was a fan of the original film, and he hit me up to say like, oh man, we should do something together, or vice versa. And recording the commentary with him, first of all, I think it's just as entertaining as the movie. Like, he's a psychopath in the best way, and like, we had a lot of fun doing that. So there's so much world building that exists outside of the film. I mean, a lot of the stuff too. We made my friend Jessica McHugh is a horror writer. She wrote 2 of the Nailbiters books. Like, so when you see the ad, fake Goosebumps series, she wrote There's a Mummy in My Locker and Phantom of the Water Park as real books that you could buy from her website. Like, we did a limited edition at first where we only gave it to certain crowdsource backers. But I'm realizing, like, oh my God, this Jessica wrote these fucking books. I have to make sure she can, people can see her fucking work outside of the, I don't know, 10 people that paid at that level. But then the other thing we did too was we did the band. Okay, so Stefan the Vampire has a mortal dagger, and we had the band Queen Wolf that Mike Walls, who plays Stefan, his band recorded a whole EP as a mortal dagger. So that's like, if you really like shitty goth rock from the 90s, you can get that. And actually, it's really not shitty. It's really great music, right? But like, at least I loved it. But yeah, that's I don't know if they have that on their band's called Queen Wolf, and you could probably just message them and they'll probably give you a copy of it. But yeah, it's we just did all that stuff because, one, we're crazy people, and 2, because we really like that sort of storyscaping, that building that mythology.
When it's so fun for a fan who enjoys the material to be able to dive in like that. I can't wait to pick up some Nailbiters books for myself.
My dad plays the blind sculptor, and he's actually Governor Barlow in the original. But I was like, oh, you can't, like, Barlow lost the election, like you can't be that same character in the movie. And that's something that only I would fucking know, right? Like, that's really one of those weird things where it's like, no one fucking knows Barlow won the election, but I tell him that like it's like, like it's like canon, and no one would fucking know that just because I'm a weird head. But so we just put him in glasses and said, Dad, masturbate this weird sculpture.
Incredible. All right, so while we're talking about casting, you brought up, oh, hi, Keith. You brought up Melissa earlier. Melissa LaMartina is your wife, also played Ivy Sparks in the film, also is in your band Beach Creeper, also was in Call Girl of Cthulhu, although not LaMartina at the time. Did you all meet on that film, or?
Yeah, so she did. So that's how we met. So I met Melissa when she was Melissa O'Brien, and now basically we met making Call Girl, but she had auditioned for I could tell this story, but it's just it's a long story. But I fell madly in love with her while we made that movie, and we've been creative collaborators ever since. We played in a couple different bands together. We had a band called Vanishing Hitchhikers. It was all sort of like folklore based, like urban legend based folk rock stuff. And then she sings in Beach Creeper. So Beach Creeper is like our surf punk band, all about monsters and cryptids. And she produced this one. And she was really like, it was, she had produced also as well What Happens Next Will Scare You. So, but she has a large background in the horror stuff and a really strong background in theater locally in Maryland, like basically helped pass a lot of stuff.
Because you mentioned it before we came live, but I don't think we've said it here. If you're a fan of Melissa's work in this film or elsewhere, you can also see her as the horror hostess, Aurora Borealis. Very cool.
Yeah, I'm literally on her set right now.
Yeah. What's your process of working together like. I mean, Media Meltdown is also produced by me and my partner Franzia, who is running our tech right now, just off camera. So we're a little bit of a relationship production team too.
Well, I will tell. Okay, so here's what I'll tell you, as you guys will probably know. It's not always the easiest thing to work with your partner because there's always sensitivities there. But I will say I'm the psychopath. I'm a kind of a control freak, and I think the best thing that we've learned together is to sort of know, at least for me, know when this is my thing or her thing. You know, like sort of like who's the driving for. Like when she does Shock Tower, I take orders, and I give suggestions, obviously, but it's not always like I think having those certain roles or sort of knowing whose final sign off is really important because ultimately I think with media, I think like there has to be like one final verdict. I have found at least in the director's seat, right? Not necessarily in different specific roles. You can have some collaboration, but ultimately this one director. But I was gonna say no. I mean, like we've I mean, it was crazy. We shot most of this movie during the pandemic, right? And we were doing a lot of Shocktail Hour live streams during the pandemic. And it was one of those weird things where, like, I mean, Melissa ended up being an alien 3 or 4 times while I was the camera guy and we had no other crew, right? Like literally, like Melissa is the wedding alien. Melissa is the alien that talks to Ding when he's having his visions. She's the Bigfoot holding primal fruit juice. And it was literally because one of those things, because it's like we couldn't have other people around, you know? So like it was just like we were trying to be as minimal as possible. And I mean, she was puppeting the bogies and the fake bogey, like all, like so much of the effect stuff, at least like on set stuff, was Melissa helping us do that. It's fun. I mean, like I really I talk about this on the commentary a little bit, but I think when you're making these low budget movies, doing what you love with the people you love is so incredibly important. Because ultimately, it's like we don't do this for the money. So if like we're not having a good time and like doing things that are just sort of like weird and fun with people we care about, like I don't know. I don't think necessarily, obviously making movies with your partner is not, or making art with your partner is not for everybody. I think a lot of people I think about, oh man, they should never do that. But at the same time too, I've been very fortunate to have someone who's smarter than me around and gives me the best life advice you'll ever hear. Just like most notably, it's like, just please slow down, right? As you can probably tell from just talking to me, I'm pretty intense.
Perfect. I love it. All right, Chris. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Before we wrap up, what's next for you and how can people support you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't even know. I mean, like next projects. I mean, I'm working on writing a Christmas project with my buddy Mike Ferrati, and I'm also doing actually just got hired to do some live action sections of a video game coming out through a division of Dread Central. But I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about what the game is. But yeah, I mean, just keep your eyes peeled, follow me on social, and you'll find that stuff. We have a website if you're looking for any other stuff, or you're looking for like the Trader Tony's catalog, any of that stuff. So our website is WNUF.bigcartel.com, WNUF.bigcartel.com, or just find me on Twitter or Instagram. Those are I'm most active on social on Twitter and Instagram. Twitter, I think, is just Chris LaMartina or Chris.LaMartina. But yeah, so basically, just find us on there and have any questions. And then I'm really sincerely impressed that I did that while holding a conversation.
Me too. I love carving pumpkins. I love everything to do with Halloween, but I'm so bad at it. It takes me forever to get them. And then when they come out, they usually look ridiculous. So I'm so impressed that you did that while we were talking.
Dude, I was literally like, I was asking Melissa before I got here, what should I carve on the pumpkin? And she was like, I don't know, your usual pumpkin face. And I'm like, because that's the only one I do, basically. Because every time I've tried to do something more artistic, I eat shit. Like, it looks awful. She's Martha Stewart. She would have fucking carved the Ivy Sparks pumpkin if she was doing this.
One year I made a mummy and it was the best thing I've ever done. I've been trying to recapture that glory ever since. It's never quite landed.
Well, guys, I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person with y'all because I feel like we would have like the most fun. So like, I feel like now I have to come and show something else sometime in the future.
We'd love to have you again. Love to have you back. Everybody, please go check out the rest of Chris's work, and we'll see you soon. Thank you all for coming out tonight.
Happy Halloween!